Good morning, team. Sun's up. Super bright. Super bright. Bitcoin running, no problem. Nothing to worry about. Let's have coffee. Talk about all the great news. Funny day. Things are getting funnier and funnier. Funnier and funnier. So, we like to start the show with Muska time. Muska time. The stupidest story we could find. Today they made it easy for us, right? They made it really easy. Bloomberg comes out with a story on El Salvador and Bitcoin. Of course they did, right? So what do they say about Bitcoin? So this is in the Bloomberg stories of the day. El Salvador's bombastic president promoted Bitcoin as a solution to the country's economic problems. 1 year in, it's clear his revolution is failing. Losers, dumb Bitcoin people, idiot president, blah, blah, blah. They go on and on and on. So, of course, here's what I think. Ohio, Kevin. Ohio, Bitcoin graffiti with Ohio. Here's the thing. You know the Bitcoin obituaries, right? Bitcoin obituaries, they're the best. They've been running forever. It's just a catalog of obituaries. I've been charting Bitcoin obituaries. I've used it in statistical models before. Years ago, I tried to talk CoinDesk into buying the site Bitcoin obituaries because I knew it was just going to be a forever evergreen piece of content that would always get funnier and funnier and funnier. Now, I believe you even start to have to categorize. We should make subcategories for all these obituaries. And I think El Salvador should have its own special subcategory of obituaries. Because how many are there going to be? This is just the first. How many times are we going to have to listen to, oh, they got it wrong. Oh, Bukele's an idiot. Oh, the Bitcoin volcano bond's a failure. They're going to go on about all this stuff, right? They're going to go, and I'll explain why. It's very predictable that they're going to do this. We're going to talk about it today. That's the point of the show today. The point of the show today is to contrast mainstream media takes on things going on in the world with how they actually are. And we're going to go all around the planet. Not every country. We can't hit everywhere. We're going to hit a bunch. It's going to be great. It's going to be hilarious, right? But first, I do also want to mention that I'll be doing a very similar show to this today at noon on Bitcoin Magazine. And when I say it's a similar show to this, it's because it'll be just me. The reason it's just me is my host on Bitcoin Magazine Live, Chris Alemo, is one of the 40,000 people who live in the county in North Carolina that had their entire energy grid attacked yesterday. There was a sabotage attack. And we don't know the details. We don't know the details on it, but this is one of our first stories that we're tracking today because the fake news machine revved up for it, right? They got the engines going. What happened? Well, here's what happened. There's a power station in Moore County, North Carolina, where my partner in the afternoon show at Bitcoin Magazine is located. And he wrote me last night saying, not going to have internet this week or energy or anything. Wish me luck. Hope I live, because things aren't looking very good there. But here's the fake story of it all. And this actually spread on Twitter as well. So this isn't really an indictment of fake news per se, because this actually went out on Twitter. And Andy No charted it. So, and this is sort of the method used for information laundering to begin with, right? We talk about information laundering here. What is information laundering? Well, you can see information laundering explicitly in the Hunter Biden laptop story when the 50 intelligence officials signed their name to the letter saying they were liars. That's exactly it. You push a piece of information through, one news outlet reports on it, and then everyone else reports on that initial news outlet reporting on it. So the first report, fake or not, becomes the basis for multiple other reports afterwards. And that's mostly how information laundering is done. You can often do it with a anonymous source, right? Anonymous sources are the preferred vehicle for information laundering. Most of these stories you hear are really about anonymous sources, and go back to James Comey being an anonymous source in articles about Russia collusion and the Mueller story. Well, then right away, the same news sources would go and quote him. So he would be the anonymous source to start the story. Then they would go back to him to get a public quote about the very thing he anonymously leaked. And the opinions wouldn't be the same. It would be, well, we're looking into that. Well, you're the one who leaked it, right? So Andy No says it's happening here with this case, and here it is. Without evidence, leftists spread a viral conspiracy theory that right-wing terrorists were behind the power substation vandalisms in Moore County, North Carolina, trying to stop a drag show. The sheriff just said at the presser there is no evidence for that claim. Thousands remain without power. So this has gone on. I guess there was a setup to this. This happened a little while ago where they said it was going to happen, and then it was people trying to protest a drag show. And in the end, it happened, but we don't know if the connection to the drag show is there. It might be the case. I don't know. Right? I'm talking about it today because it relates to my show this afternoon, and my co-host is off. I'm following it. It looks like the beginnings of information laundering, but it might not be, right? It might not be. So there you go. But a relevant story to talk about. But just like the El Salvador case, this could be one where perception and reality are not in alignment, and mainstream media records or statements about what's happening in the world never line up with what's actually happening. And Europe is maybe one of the best examples of this. So this is the world being viewed through the lens of mainstream media. And what do you get, right? What do you get? Well, first of all, this is just context. This is from Cointelegraph. It just gives you a sense of what's going on in Europe today, right? So this just gives you a sense of what's going on in Europe today. So in Europe today, they spent the Foreign Aid Department this weekend, right? The European Union's Foreign Aid Department spent almost $500,000, 400,000 US dollars, on a metaverse party, right? So they spent $400,000 on a metaverse party, and they wanted it to be showing all the young people, inspire them to get jobs in the creative industry, and oh, it's going to be great. You can get this job now. It's going to be wonderful. And it turns out that 6 people showed up in total. 6 people showed up to their metaverse event. They spent $400,000, and 6 people showed up, right? So it was a big dead event, no energy whatsoever, right? Speaking of no energy, it looks like the Germans are going to ban energy price increases now. That's their approach to solving the energy crisis in Europe. They're just going to ban price increases, right? It's not going to happen. So the same thing was tried before in Venezuela, and it didn't work out. It led to hyperinflation. So here they go. They're going to give it a shot. We'll see what happens, right? We'll see what happens. At the same time, in Europe, you've got the European Central Bank now saying this morning that there is no longer any justification to increase the European Union's balance sheet. So remember, the European Union states don't have monetary policy control over the balance sheet of the European Central Bank. They can target local interest rates, right? Local interest rates, national interest rates in Germany, France, Portugal, wherever can be targeted, right? So now Germany is saying we're not going to allow prices of energy to increase. The corollary may be inflation in other commodities, because once energy is capped, you can start seeing all kinds of black markets and everything else that happened in Venezuela, right? It's not that simple. You don't just get to stop it on one end and everything is fine elsewhere, right? There's a cause and effect here all the time. So here's what Wall Street Silver says about the results of this balance sheet freeze, right? That they're not going to use the balance sheet any longer for stimulus. Wall Street Silver says Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, the pigs, right? P-I-G-S, the pigs, are going to be in a world of pain if the ECB won't buy their bonds and keep their interest rates artificially low. Debt crisis eventually, right? So it looks like that's the clock is ticking now on sovereign debt crisis, right? It looks like the clock has always been ticking, but this makes the clock real, because we're starting to see the internal divisions in Europe, right? Germany making bold fiscal policy decisions in their own country, because the minute you mess with energy, these become political fiscal decisions, right? So fiscal being everything to do with interest rates, inflation, monetary policy, fiscal having to do with stimulus checks, tax money you get, expenditures of the government for social programs and those kinds of things. So one would imagine that in Germany, they're going to start heavily subsidizing some of these fiscal aspects in order to manage the energy price increases and inflation there. The argument being you'll see inflation elsewhere in the country, and now that these other governments that are ill-equipped to have this exact cocktail that Germany seems okay with are going to have to deal with it, right? So that means all these other countries are going to be in a world of trouble, as they said, and it could create either a situation where the European Central Bank is under even more stress and people start to question it from an existential point of view, right? From an existential point of view, does it work anymore? Or else the actual bond markets will dry up and these countries will lose funding and the ability to fund all of their social programs. So we'll see. But it might be okay if you look at one of these global warming studies from Arup, and this is with the European Union. They came out today with some of their projections on how to deal with European consumption in cities by the time temperatures increase globally by 1.5 degrees, which they say will happen sometime in the 2030s. So in their report, they've got all kinds of nice tables, high production value. Their ambitious target for 2030, so they have normal targets and ambitious targets of where they would like to see consumption at in European cities. They might get their way, right? They want, by 2030, zero private ownership of vehicles. That's what they're after, right? And they want each vehicle to last for 50 years, right? They want 50-year shelf life on the vehicles, and they want them to be, they want no one to own one. They want you to buy 3 pieces of new clothing per year, right? They want it down to 3 pieces. And they want the supply chain to be 75% less, 75% more efficient. They want and this is in writing. They're saying this explicitly. Right? They're telling you what their goal is for your consumption. So 0 private vehicles, 3 pieces of clothing a year. That's their target. They want to target 0 kilograms, pounds, just no meat. Right? You can't eat meat. And they want 0 kilograms or gallons of dairy products. No milk, nothing, right? That's their actual target. Food consumption interventions, it's called, right? The food consumption interventions. This is from a group called Arup, and they published it with the University of Leeds, City Foundation, one of the banks, right? Of course, they love all this. Now, imagine where all of the ESG in all of this would be. Imagine the amount of consultations it would take to get to 0 kilograms of meat consumption in Europe. They're on their way. They've closed down the farms, the 3,000 farms in Holland, the 2nd or 3rd largest agricultural country on earth. Now, there's a bit of a trick to that. They're the 2nd or 3rd, one of the largest agricultural exporters in the world, but the flowers have a lot to do with it, right? They have really high-end stuff that they're growing there. That's my understanding. I'm no expert on Dutch agricultural economy, but nevertheless. So the future of urban consumption in a 1.5 centigrade world was the C40, Arup, and all these guys and City Foundation, plugging what they can do in the future, right? Plugging what they can do in the future. So there you go. Sounds like a... Justin says, sounds like a great way to launder money. Well, there you go. The P-Man van price controls, that always ends well. CK, remember to share the show. Share the show, guys. We're growing well, though. I'm happy, but we can get more, right? We want to grow more. And Bitcoin graffiti, correct. Big exporter, some of it flowers. Yeah, I think the flowers are a big part, but I'm not sure. When you go around Europe, all those train stations, everything's big flower markets everywhere. Beautiful, like one of the things you love when you go to Europe. As I understand, a lot of that does come from Holland, and they export a lot around the world. And I know I lived in Ottawa in Canada for a while, and Ottawa received as a gift from Holland for liberating them in the Second World War. That was a Canadian mission, I guess. And as well, the royal family of Holland lived in Canada during the World War, and I believe the previous queen or something like that was even born in Canada because she was there during the war and couldn't go home. So as a gift, they now tend to all the gardens in Ottawa and fill it with tulips every year. So they have a big tulip festival, which I've seen a million times. It's quite nice. They're just all over town, like up and down every little path. every little median in a road. It's really nice. Capital cities, there's a weird thing. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, and it comes from the British tradition where, because the sovereign owns a lot of the land, the parliament buildings and all that, they can't pay tax to themselves, right? There's this idea that it's all held by the crown. It is the crown, and the crown can't pay tax to itself. So what they end up doing, so not even a municipal government can tax them, right? So when you're in a city like Ottawa, or I think it's the same in Washington, D.C., that you don't need a sovereign. It's just the logic of it. I don't think the city of D.C. can put property tax, for example, on the White House or the Capitol building. And I know for a fact in Canada they're not able to, right? So you can't charge tax to these things. So what ends up happening is they have to just give a gift, an honorarium, right? They don't pay property tax, but they just give money to their town every year, to the city that they're in order to just build beautiful little things. That's why you get all these little random beautiful things in capital cities, because they have a different funding mechanism. Bitcoin Graffiti says, yeah, Launderfest forever, Dex says. Kevin Opar says 2 socks plus 1 underwear equals 3 pieces of clothing. Yeah, you get a pair of socks, 2 pairs of socks and some underwear by 2030. Bitcoin Graffiti, not the majority, but a substantial amount. I guess that's about the flowers. Bitcoin Graffiti, correct. Canadians liberated the north of the Netherlands after the Hunger Winter. Yeah, there was a time when I was young where, well, basically all the Gen Xers, I missed that generation, but I was close enough and heard a lot about their life. All the Gen Xers who did the European travels, we're going to go backpack through Europe in the 90s and 80s. They couldn't buy, if they were Canadian, they couldn't buy a beer in Holland, was my understanding. That everyone would just, when the boomers were still out partying, they would just sort of, when they were young enough, they would just buy you beers. And, that was kind of a rumor, maybe or not, it's true. But it's even one of the reasons why a lot of the Canadians put that ridiculous Canadian flag on their backpack. It was like a way to get free beer, right? Mythically, a way to get free beer, so some people said, but I'm not sure. Market Garden failed in the north, got fucked for another winter, Bitcoin Graffiti says. Yeah, I don't know the exact history of all of it. I just know that Canada had an involvement, and it was really tough on them, and really tough on Holland. They had a tough time under the Nazis, and they loved Canadians for liberating them. That's my basic understanding. All right, so let's keep going with this theme of the way these countries are described in the news versus how it is in reality. So we've already seen that El Salvador, it's a failure. It's a failure. Here's one from Iran, right? This is a headline so if you don't know what's going on in Iran, it's been weeks now, almost months. And it started with a young girl who took off her hijab, and then she was killed by security forces, the morality police, right? They had actual morality police there. Now, this spurred a whole bunch of protests, led primarily by women, and even a lot of humor, right? Humor is always one of the most effective tools during these types of revolutions. I doubted the power of this revolution until I saw the humor. And the humor was, a lot of these imams in Iran are kind of old and all that stuff. So you'd see all these pictures of young girls going up and tipping their caps off and running away, and the imams can never catch them, right? They're just not physically capable of catching them. So it caught on. It became a real big form of protest, but things got really violent. They've got a whole bunch of people who I guess their parliament or their government has decided they're going to hang. It's like thousands of young people for protesting. The protests have spilled everywhere. Women are especially powerful in this protest. They're really pushing households to join. It had a big, it resonated in the World Cup, where a lot of Iranians were actually pushing for the American team when the Americans were playing Iran. As I understand, there's even a Iranian fan in Iran who was pulling for America publicly and had some viral videos. And my understanding is that could this is not verified, right? I'm just going on stuff I see on Twitter, so don't quote me on that stuff. That I don't want to start fake news, right? So, but nevertheless, things aren't going as the regime planned. Everything's up in the air. Things are confusing, and there is a scenario where the whole thing falls, and there's an actual revolution in Iran this time. So how is the New York Times covering all this stuff? They haven't been giving a ton of attention to it, right? But this weekend, the Iranian government tried to adapt a little bit to the conditions and put some spin on it. And what they did was they apparently got rid of the morality police. And the New York Times covered it straight. They said, breaking news, Iran has abolished its morality police after months of protests set off by the death of Masa Amini, that was the girl, a young woman who was arrested over strict Islamic dress code, right? So sounds great, right? Sounds great. Well, not so much. All kinds of people saying, come on, New York Times, you're doing a Sam Bankman-Fried here. You're not even covering the story. And you've got Nazanin Boniadi, who I think is one of the actresses from the new Lord of the Rings show. She says, no, the announcement was not a legal edict to abolish the morality police, but a trial balloon floated by an official. The Islamic Republic authorities clearly understand they are in dire straits. And all of this really just being a push in order to change international perception, right? Eli Kohenim says here, why can't the New York Times get the facts straight? Morality police has not been disbanded in Iran. Hijab laws are still on the books, and Iranians are not sacrificing their lives for reform. They are overthrowing the Islamic regime, right? So the entire framing here, it's not about reform. It's about a total change, right? So now starting to see it, right? Now starting to see it. Let's take a look at China. What does the mainstream news say about China, right? So in Iran, it's, oh, they changed the morality police. It should be okay. Some reform happening, right? Trying to change. In China, The Atlantic writes, China's strict COVID policies have led to hunger and unemployment, but lifting them will lead to many deaths. What costs are protesters willing to accept? So now they're going back on the, oh, well, this is for public safety, the COVID stuff. Remember, very few people have died from COVID in China over the past few months. I don't have the exact numbers, but I've read it's pretty low, right? And on this show, we have taken the worldview that the lockdowns are really not about COVID at all. They're really about China having to abandon economic forecasts and economic data and economic growth as the main organizing principle of the country. And they reverted to pure authoritarianism. This view is held by folks like Peter Zehan, several others who pay close attention to China. We've been calling for or predicting collapse in China for well over a year now. If you go back to old episodes of The Breakup, if you see episodes from last year at this time, that's what we're talking about, right? So we remain consistent here that China is on a track to fall apart, the CCP anyway, and that internal revolution is coming soon, right? So we've been on that before any of this stuff started, before any of the protests started, before any of the upgraded zero COVID policy stuff started to be implemented, right? I was making these predictions when the whole world was sort of still in mild lockdowns everywhere. So here we are. But what else is going on? So they say it's just that, right? They say, oh, it's just COVID and what's going on? Okay. Well, structurally, let's look at what's going on in China. This is from CNBC today. Manufacturing orders from China down 40% in unrelenting demand collapse, right? So US manufacturing orders in China are down 40%. China to US container volume is down 21% this year. Chinese factories are shutting down early in January, weeks before the Lunar New Year. And this started last year. If you remember, they started closing things down before Lunar New Year last year. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports that Apple is going to move production of the iPhone out of China now after everything that's happened in the past few weeks. So, of course, Apple getting just dragged through the coals here in America, first for supporting the Chinese protests by creating an app store update for the that limited the ability of the airdrop function to work in China because people were using it to get around the firewall. So that was implemented. Then there was rumors about Apple taking ads off of Twitter. That looks like it's gone the other way now. And it looks like Tim Cook said he never considered removing Twitter from the App Store. Now, he says he never considered. I mean, it doesn't look like he never considered, because it took him days and a personal meeting with Elon Musk to say it publicly, when he could have just tweeted it, right? He could have tweeted it and it could have been over. So never considered, but nevertheless, they paid a price, Apple did, and probably understood from enough people that they would not continue with the Apple ecosystem if a move like this was made, because it was seen by some as not just an attack on Elon Musk or an attack on Twitter. It was an attack on the Republic, in a sense, right? An attack on the Republic, in a sense, because it's Americans who would pay the price for Apple's decisions, and a lot of people were not okay with that. So they learned. So that's going to change. Now, what's happening here in America, right? Well, again, NBC News, right? Here, NBC News. So they say in El Salvador, failure, Bitcoin failure, and then in Iran, reform, no more hijab laws, and then in China, what if they get rid of the COVID thing? They got to think about the lives they're going to lose if they don't have zero lockdowns anymore, right? That's not great. NBC News says Elon Musk has generated fresh interest in Twitter, but social media experts say it's only temporary. And what are the reasons for it's temporary? Oh, it's some, people are interested now because there's more shit posting and all of these things, right? I looked for the expert stuff in the NBC News article, and these are not experts, and they had nothing really to offer other than people will get bored. People are going to get bored. They're going to go do something else, and they're only there because he's allowing the craziest shit to be said, right? That's their whole reason. Now they're predicting still that they're going to have all these troubles. Meanwhile, Amazon has announced plans to return advertising to Twitter, $100 million worth of advertising, right? So that's a big change, right? Now, with all of the news that broke this weekend on Twitter with the Hunter Biden laptop case and the Twitter files being given to Matt Taibbi, and now we're waiting on Barry Weiss, who's also got a bunch of it. Matt Taibbi went first with the story of the Hunter Biden laptop case, even though there's more emails there about other instances. So the Washington Post, we predicted 2 days ago what reactions would be. It would be ignore the story, which still remains consistent, not a lot of people talking about it, or else attack the messenger, right? So attack Taibbi. We've seen all kinds of canned attacks on Matt Taibbi. We talked about the formula yesterday, the talking points, running PR for a billionaire. That was repeated by I don't know how many voices. Where do they get the stuff from anyway? Where does it come from? How do they all get on script like that? Is it one person and then they all copy? I don't know. It's very difficult to say where this stuff comes from. But it happened, right? So here's the Washington Post. It was billed as a bombshell. Elon Musk would finally expose how Twitter engaged in free speech suppression in the critical run-up to the 2020 election. But by the time the dust settled Saturday, even some conservatives were grumbling that it was a dud, right? Elon Musk's Twitter files ignite divisions, but haven't changed minds. Now, the haven't changed minds thing, I think, is actually true, right? I'm going to go with that too, because, haven't changed minds. It's not just this thing where all the people who were so sure that suppressing the Hunter Biden story was a good thing a year ago or 2 years ago would have their minds changed today. Very few people can be persuaded that way, right? Very few people. So true, it doesn't really change huge swaths of people. But think about what it does for all of those crypto bros who blew a tire on the SBF story, right? So all the crypto bros who blew a tire on the SBF story, a large portion of them were still unaware the New York Times was bullshit, right? And now they saw the coverage of the New York Times. Put this on top of that, right? Things start to become, a new narrative is forming, let's say, right? That's why we've said here that SBF and the collapse of crypto is going to push more and more people to Bitcoin, right? To Bitcoin, because they start to see the faults in the system, the faults in the media apparatus. So it would cause a much larger wave of folks to come to Bitcoin. And I think that prediction looks like it's bearing out. It's going to take more time, but you can see it in the world. It's happening, right? Um, so so that's definitely happening, right? That's definitely there. And so I'll say, you can't just convince people. This isn't a facts thing. It's what people will think, right? How people will react. So most people have reverted into their shell. The truth is a lot for some folks to handle, right? It's going to happen in stages, because if you admit that, then the consequences are you've got to admit to a bunch of stuff, right? And that's not easy for everyone. So we're not going to hold our breath on that, right? But you can see it. Mike Solana picked up on that exact point. Absolutely insane for these journalists to accuse a reporter who just accurately reported a major story of doing PR for a billionaire after their weeks-long love story with SBF, a man who just stole $10 billion, but is a very nice guy who meant well. And those very nice guy who meant well stories have continued, right? He's got more and more of these, and we're going to talk a bit about that at the end. Here was one of the best takes I saw on the whole Twitter thing on the weekend, and it was Kara Swisher, right? Kara Swisher, who, remember a few weeks ago, Kara Swisher, a New York Times tech journalist, she did an interview with Fetterman and said, "Oh, he's fine." Fetterman, and this is the Fetterman 2024 show, right? So we loved Kara Swisher's endorsement of Fetterman. That was great, right? So when Kara Swisher said he's doing great, I think that helped him beat Oz, right? So Kara Swisher, she was one of the first people to fight the NBC journalist who said, "Oh, he can't really talk." And when I spoke to him through the machine, because he basically has one of those chat GPT AI interfaces, right? He does. That's what he's had for a while. He's had a machine that if you plug information in, it will send information out and answer things. It looks like he's got one of these devices, right? And so he had to use it, and the reporter said, no. Kara Swisher said, "No, that's fake. He's fine. The machine and him are fine. Don't worry about it," right? So she gets Yoel Roth on yesterday. And if you remember, Yoel Roth was the guy who was in charge of all of the suppression on Twitter, right? So here's what someone wrote, and it's a perfect assessment. And it's a clip. They interviewed each other yesterday. If you don't know who Kara Swisher is, we're not here to make fun of anyone's looks, or this is not to mock Kara Swisher or Yoel Roth. Okay, I'm not trying to mock them. So, but we got to talk a little bit about the physical stage and the set and what you see when you consume this interview and these images of them. So here's what it is. Note in the above clip, the conspicuously higher testosterone, Kara Swisher, chastising Roth for not being able to tolerate a joke, while Roth lilts and vocal fries his way through a knitting circle exercise in sanctimonious consensus building. And that's what you had to see, right? What you saw was Kara Swisher saying to him, come on, like that was a joke, right? That was a joke. And he's sitting there saying, and this was about the Babylon Bee story, pardon me. It was about the Babylon Bee story, like banning the Babylon Bee for giving the Surgeon General, who is trans, the Man of the Year award, right? So they gave the Surgeon General the Man of the Year award, and that's what caused Babylon Bee to be banned. So she's sitting there saying, come on, aren't you guys a little weak, right? And then no answer. It's just him saying, trans things are this, and trans, you got to be careful. And we're very pro-trans on the show. Remember, we are 100% pro LGBTQ plus on this show. We have a lot of questions about messaging around some of the trans stuff, and what do people expect to do to the parents who bring their kids to trans shows? Like, are conservatives really arguing that we go and like take their kids away or deem them unfit for parenthood? The whole thing's a mess, right? And I see a lot of the anti-trans stuff. It's real. You do have to be concerned. I'm not advocating for anyone at all to go to a trans show, but you got to see it as action reaction too, right? Right-wing conservatives are also victims to psyops and enragement, engagement, and all those kinds of things. They wrote the book on it, frankly, right? This happened during the Obama administration. Algorithmic teasing of anger and attitudes and division was very, very powerful then, and the system synced a long time ago, and conservatives are a part of it too, right? So I often see this as an example. Now, again, that does not mean I'm taking my kids to any drag show. That's not happening, right? But look, I grew up, I was a young man in Asia. This kind of stuff was very normal in Asia. These kinds of bars are all over the place. It's what normal, anyone goes there. Hetero people go on dates to these lip syncing bars and stuff like that. It's not a complete, it's not so clear cut in other parts of the world, let's say. Even myself, as a young kid, I was in theater all the time and was a regular cross-dresser as a result of that, right? Not out in public, I wasn't wearing girls' clothes, but I was in a million plays and did all kinds of Shakespeare shows. And I don't know if you know how many Shakespeare shows call for cross-dressing. It's like all of them, right? Twelfth Night, they're all over the place. So if you get involved in that stuff, you just start doing it, right? And no, it's not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing, but I'm less sensitive to it and see a lot of the enragement, engagement around it. And it's important to just know that it's happening, right? It's important to know it's happening, because ask yourself the question, right? When you see conservatives screaming and yelling at parents bringing their kids to these shows, what are they saying? What are they saying? Are they saying we got to make laws to stop parents from doing stuff with their kid? Like, I don't get it, right? That doesn't fit with anyone's ideas, right? So anyway, there you go. So we're not here to talk about those things, really. But when you look at this Yoel Roth guy and you look at the language he uses, the body language, and you see, I think this is just a perfect way to illustrate it, right? That that it's sort of that same genre of moronic uptalk. He's full of the moronic uptalk. I just want to protect people, right? We don't want anyone who's in danger to get hurt, right? It's the same formula, right? And seeing Kara Swisher next to him was striking, right? She was higher T. What are you doing? Get mad about Babylon Bee, because he had to justify it, right? And then he just talked out the clock, and then she let him go. She didn't really hold his feet to the fire on that, right? She did not really hold his feet to the fire. But it was part of this whole reaction, right? It was part of this whole reaction. The only newspaper that got it right was the Daily Mail in England, and this was their headline about what happened this weekend, right? This is their headline about what happened with journalists, Elon, the Twitter files. They say, liberal journalists rush to smear reporter Matt Taibbi for releasing Elon Musk's explosive Twitter files that expose censorship of Hunter Biden laptop, right? They're calling him Substack Man. Here's Brian Johnson saying, I love them calling him Substack Man. People that couldn't earn a paying audience if their lives depended on it are critical of someone who can. Then almost every single one of them that works for a billionaire say Taibbi is doing PR for the world's richest man. Michael Malice, I think, again, had the best take. The only cathedral operatives value is their status and power, which they refer to as a democracy, in which they are inevitably the aristocracy, right? So you're starting to see that the story you're being told about certain countries is actually not just a little off, it's the opposite. It's the opposite, right? El Salvador, China, this isn't just a little protest and they did some reforms and now the stock market's up because they did some reforms, but they didn't really do reforms. So there's more reforms coming Wednesday, right? That's what's going on in China. And our news is just saying, well, the stock market's up. Looks like the protests are going to be over. All good, right? Ready to go. Iran, right? Reform. Is it reform or is it revolution, right? Brazil. This is an actual headline today from the LA Times this morning. Now, we're following the Brazil story here. It's been weeks and weeks now. Millions of people on the street, people coming from the Amazon, people protesting everywhere about the presidential election, right? Still no declared winner between Lula and Bolsonaro, right? And here's a title from the LA Times. For indigenous defenders of Brazil's rainforests, Lula is our only hope. That's the headline. That's the headline. Now, it's a quote from someone there, right? They didn't just, this isn't the New York Times, this isn't the LA Times coming out and quoting themselves on this. This is a Brazilian, but it's the headline. It's the headline, right? It's the headline. You've got here's Sticks, Hex, and Hammer, basically underlining what is going on here. And he says, whatever the legacy media doesn't talk about is the real news. Think Ghislaine Maxwell, FTX. And when they openly proclaim it boring or a non-issue, it's even realer. Think the Twitter files, Hunter Biden's laptop, the Panama Papers, right? And Panama Papers. Remember when that happened? Have you ever heard of that ever again since? It's just erased. It's like the SBF story. Where did it go? It's gone, right? Where did it go? So you've got a situation where the news can't report accurately on what's happening in any of these countries. Now look at what's happening here in America, right? You get President Trump this weekend, who I think now is completely finished, right? He came out this weekend and said, throw out the Constitution for the Twitter thing. We got to shrink the government to just the Constitution, right? And then maybe we shrink the Constitution. But let's get rid of all the other stuff before we even get to the Constitution, right? Now, on this show, we've said many times, we don't care what happened in the 2020 election, right? We don't care. Elections are about moving on, the next one. We want to be able to talk about election reform, having more secure elections that have more credibility, because we have zero credibility in our elections now, right? Our elections are as credible as our media and our financial system, and even our global electrical grid or electrical systems, right? They are completely in doubt. There's no getting around that. But for Trump to come out and say the Constitution should be dialed back or something, I mean, what's he fucking talking about, right? So he's done, right? Let's just forget about Trump. And what you see is, as it is, Trump, as we described very early on the show, is all about gathering energy and redirecting it at a thing, right? But now he's got to deal with Elon Musk, who is very similar, and Kanye, who's very similar. Now, imagine you're Trump and you're competing against these two guys. He looks like third place, just as far as being able to gather energy. Now, you can categorize this get rid of the Constitution thing as one of those, like what Kanye did on Alex Jones, or what Elon does to get attention. It could just be his typical trick, which we've described here many times, right? You gather energy, you focus it on one thing, and you divert it, right? You get all the attention, and then you divert the attention on the thing that you really want to talk about. Trump wrote the book on this. But it looks like they figured him out, right? They don't give him attention. And Trump on low energy, low attention doesn't really work, right? He sounds like an idiot, right? It only works when he triggers people. If he doesn't trigger people, if he doesn't get them so angry, it won't work. And in this case, it's all kind of friendly fire now. When he says get rid of the Constitution, he's not inducing anger on the other side. The only reason I would support Trump in 2024 is the only reason that I can be convinced is to just see the triggering, to watch people lose their minds. I mean, that's it. That's the only, the triggering that would happen from him is the only enticing thing. That's it, right? Nothing else is desirable anymore. The policies are stupid. I got to hear about January 6th how many times, yet all the January 6th people are still languishing in jail. He could have pardoned them, right? He could have pardoned Assange. Like I said, for me, it still comes to the last day, unforgivable last day in office for him, and the rest is history as far as I'm concerned, right? No pardon for Ross, no pardon for Ed, no pardon for Julian. Get the fuck out of here, right? You're toast. And not much he can do to come back from that as far as I'm concerned, right? And I think as far as a lot of people are concerned, I think there is a world where people say, well, he was cheated and, you know, maybe he gets his revenge or something like that. But at the same time, there's no reason, right? Now, look at Kanye, right? Look at Kanye. Everyone going crazy on him, right? Everyone saying it's over, it's done. But look for a second at Kanye's record here, right? On this show, we have categorized everything we've seen from Kanye in the past few weeks as art. Art that's difficult and ugly, hard to accept, but nevertheless, I mean, if you come on with a GIMP mask and a net and a Yahoo chocolate milk and you use the net to talk, I mean, this is art. If you saw if anyone saw the preview, the setup to him going on, do you think he didn't know? If you see the preview and you see how lucid he is, do you think he didn't know that he would cause this reaction? Do you think today he doesn't know what he could say so people could like him again? I mean, he wanted us to not like him, right? It's hard to like him when he says that kind of stuff. It's really ugly, awful, right? And the only way that you can really even see anything redeeming in it is if you see it the way I'm trying to explain I see it, right? I'm not saying you necessarily have to see it that way. That's the way I see it. If you want to hate the guy, that's what he's asked you to do. He said, hate me, right? He said, don't like me. I'm all these things. But we're part of the show here. We're part of the experience, right? He wants people to go through these emotions because that's what art is, right? That's what art is. Now, of course, the Nazis and Hitler, we hate everything about them, but that's what makes the move so effective. You know, he went years ago to the awards show and he did the rudest thing with Taylor Swift, right? Everyone thought at the time that's the rudest thing, right? Oh my God. Then he wears the red hat, right? Oh, it's so crazy. It's terrible. It's the rudest thing. And then he goes on the fashion show and it's the White Lives Matter. And then he becomes a Christian, or before he becomes a Christian, when that was the rudest thing, right? Remember, even before all of the Taylor Swift stuff, it was the misogyny, right? With the way he treated women, right? So he has this career where all he does is say the thing you're absolutely not supposed to say, and he gets a ton of attention for it, right? If you watch the video of him before he goes on Alex Jones, he's with Ali Alexander, a Bitcoiner. I don't know if you guys know that. Ali Alexander, a Bitcoiner, through and through, Bitcoiner. Has been for a long time now. I knew Ali Alexander before any of this stuff as a Bitcoiner. He was a small Twitter Bitcoin account for many years and very interested in this stuff. Now, he has a whole nother interest in politics, and you haven't heard anything from the guy since 2020 because he was the actual organizer of the January 6th thing, right? He was the actual organizer. He said, come here and do this. We're going to have a thing. Da, da, da. So he's been off the grid, haven't heard from him. So as I understand, he is now the actual campaign leader of the Kanye campaign, and Milo is out, right? So we said on this show, he was getting bad advice. I read the Milo statements about the personal aspect of Trump and how much he hated him, and I said, maybe not good, right? Ali Alexander, before they even go on to Alex Jones, talks about the Overton window and talks about how they're going to push and push and push the Overton window. The point is to keep everyone on their toes, to keep saying the craziest stuff, and to just smash, smash, smash. And if you do so, you can actually flip reality, right? The point is to flip reality from where it is now to where it could be, right? So you get all of this attention, and I don't think Kanye is out of this for that reason, right? He knows how to come back from this. He knows what he can say, and he knows how to manipulate this situation. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get there in 2024 either. I mean, I don't think he even knows, right? He's playing a game. He knows how to run the engine hot to the point where you cause the reaction, the Trump move, right? You run the engine hot to the point where you get attention. He's just better at it than Trump. He's just better at it than Trump, right? Trump goes with the Constitution thing, lands completely flat, right? Whatever small group of people he had left that would support that, I think that would support him. Once that's there, once he put himself above the Constitution, it's over, right? I think it's over. That's how I see it, right? So where does it leave us? It leaves us as blind because the media won't do its job. It leaves us cold because energy policy around the world is just garbage, right? So we're blind and cold, but as we all know, Bitcoin can heal all of this. So the more the fiat world struggles, the more a view of it is presented that has no future to it. I mean, can you actually picture where the world goes from here? Even if you buy the official news, China is some reform away, Iran is some reform away, Europe, as long as they can figure out how to have 3 pairs of clothes and don't eat any meat and don't own any cars, they'll be fine, right? They'll be fine. So just believe people when they tell you who they are. This is the world they want, right? Believe them. Believe them. That's what they want. That's what they're selling you. The Bitcoiners are selling you a completely different future, where someone like Kanye can be president. Because the point is, we don't want the president in all of this business. We don't want a leader who's running a World War II battleship anymore. We don't need that. We don't need the most serious guy in the room trained out of Harvard. We actually don't need that anymore. Trump was fine. The new guy with the brain, and he's 80, he's great. We like him more than Trump, right? And whoever comes next is going to be in that same trajectory. We are changing the role of president, right? And the new president will be less powerful than the last presidents. And that'll be great for Bitcoin, because the states themselves are going to get more power, right? America is flexing the flexibility that comes out of its federalism and states' rights and state capacity to solve these problems. Texas is going to solve it. Florida's going to solve it. Arizona's going to solve it. California's going to solve it, right? We're going to solve it. And once we do, we're going to export all of this stuff to the world, right? And it won't come from USA or anything like that. It's just going to be from Bitcoiners, right? We're going to fix it, guys. We're almost done. CIA working overtime in Iran, Dex says. Yeah, they sure are. Bitcoin graffiti following up on the Holland story. So North remained Nazi for a whole another winter. I didn't know that. I did not know that. Dex, they should really just abolish the 2-term limit for Fetterman. Yes, they should. Fetterman for life. The P-Man van. It seems Rosie a joke equals automatic personal attack. Yeah. It seems, yeah, today a joke equals automatic personal attack. Yeah. All right, team. Slight change in scheduling this afternoon. I will be doing the news and notes at noon today on the Bitcoin Magazine YouTube channel and Rumble. See you there. I'll be alone because of the attack on the grid, so I'll be running the show myself. Should be great. It should be fun. Hopefully, there's other news stories, and I'll add a bit of what I got in there today to the feed, and should be great. Peace. See you later.